Good evening, everybody. There are still a few people joining us, but while that's happening, um, I'm Stephanie Mora, MassDEP Division Director of Wetlands and Waterways. And first and foremost, I just want to thank everybody for coming out this evening and joining us for this public information session. As Daniel mentioned, it's being recorded. This recording will be posted and be available for those of you who would love to review the material, and obviously for folks who were unable to join us tonight or for our earlier session today. Just a couple of quick notes. This session is a public information session, and the purpose of it is really to preview the draft regulation proposal that is now out for public comment. Daniel will describe this in more detail. This is not a public hearing, so we actually will have an opportunity for questions and answers. We may not be able to answer everything, but the point here is to help you better understand what is in the proposed regulation package to help you formulate comments on behalf of yourself or whatever organization or entity you represent. The other thing I want to note is that you may be having deja vu because many of you are affiliated with an entity, an interest, an organization that may be interested in both wetlands permitting and regulations, as well as Chapter 91 waterways permitting and regulations. You're not hallucinating. There are two reg packages out on the street right now for public comment in parallel. So tonight's focus is on the waterways or Chapter 91 regulation package. There are additional public information sessions and public hearings being scheduled, or they are scheduled separately on the wetlands regulations package. And I won't bog down our introduction here with details on that, but I'll put the schedule for that in the chat for those of you who are interested in the wetlands information sessions and hearings. And with that, I will turn it back over to Daniel Pageant as our MC for the evening.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Daniel Pageant. I am the program chief for the Chapter 91 Waterways program here at MassDEP. We have several DEP folks in attendance this evening. You've just met Stephanie. We also have Chrissy Hobbs. Chrissy is the assistant director of the Waterways program. Chrissy does all the work. Alice Doyle. Alice is a regional planner for the Waterways program. And Pam Harvey is with us as well. Pam Harvey is a long-standing and valued member of our technical team here at MassDEP and has done considerable work on the waterways and the wetlands update regulations. A couple of housekeeping items. I think Stephanie took care of some. I know she took care of some, and I will take care of a few more. Please excuse any repetition. This is a public information session. This is not a public hearing. There are public hearings scheduled for January 25th next week. You can register for those through links available on our website, the same website which you found to register for this evening. This session this evening is an opportunity for the department for us to tell you what we're doing, to tell you some of our rationale, to try to answer questions if we are able this evening, to certainly hear your questions, and to encourage you to attend the public hearings, one or more, and to submit written comments for the department to consider. While there are at least two people taking notes tonight, in addition to myself trying to keep up with some of the conversation, it's critically important that you submit your comments in writing so that those comments may be posted on the DEP's website, and that we will take those into consideration as we move from draft regulations to final regulations. These are important matters. It is critically important that we get input from interested parties who have technical expertise or merely concerns about the future here of 91 with regard to resiliency. We may not have answers to all of your questions this evening, but we would still be grateful for the questions, and we'll answer those that we can. In the case of overlap between the wetlands program and the waterways regulations, we have Stephanie and Pam here this evening, so we may defer to them if appropriate. I'm sure I forgot something, and we'll get back to it later when it comes to mind.
Dan, pardon
so-
me one second. Just we want to acknowledge the other event happening this evening.
Thank you. Can I learned recently is Governor Healy's State of the State address, and that is happening at 7:00 this evening. I'm sure that could be watched online, streamed live. We became aware of that when it was too late to reschedule this event. I will tell you that this afternoon session ran about an hour and 5 or 10 minutes. So we'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Anyone who needs to leave certainly should feel free to do so. This session and this afternoon session the videos will both be posted on our website at the same location where you found this. And the best way to get there is to Google MassDEP Combat Opportunities, and you will find Waterways. You'll find these items. They'll be posted, not tonight, they'll be posted shortly. Okay. So let's get forward. Let's move forward. And I'm sure my colleagues will interrupt me if necessary, if I forgot something else. Please do. Here we go here. So we have a relatively short slide deck, and let's get started. There we go. Very short agenda. We want to go through. What the proposed changes in an overview. We're not going to go red line by red line, but we'll describe what we're doing. We'll describe some of our intent, and we'll be happy to take your questions and answer those that we can. And then at the end, we will provide an update on the schedule and provide again the address where folks could submit comments. And I will ask one of my colleagues, if you could please kindly put that note in the chat now, so folks can grab that as they see fit. Okay. I don't recall whether Stephanie said this part or not. My apologies. If anyone has a clarifying question, the chat is a great place to put it. If someone wants to ask a live question, put your hand up. Zoom is smart enough to know who put their hand up first. So again, here we go. The fact that you are all here this evening tells us that you are aware of the problems, the challenges of climate change, both in a tidal environment, sea level rise, storm surges, and also in an inland environment, increased precipitation, followed by increased stream flow, stress on various pieces of public infrastructure. There are many challenges. This set of proposed changes represent the first part of the department's efforts to address these in Chapter 91. There, as Stephanie mentioned, there is a Resiliency 2.0 effort afoot, and that is picking up speed. And once we get these Resiliency 1.0 regs out, you will all hear more about the 2.0, and I'll touch on that a little bit more later. These are just two financial examples of why this is important. There are so many reasons that we could spend all night talking about them, but then we would all miss the State of the State address. Among the changes that we're proposing to make to the 91 regulations, again, all of which are on our website. The first one listed here, I promise not to read every slide. The first one listed here is the most critical. Presently, the Chapter 91 regulations require some projects, non-water dependent use projects, to consider historical sea level rise. That's not going to cut it going forward, I think, as we all know. So the first and most important change the department seeks to make to these regulations is to require projects to consider projected sea level rise, not just for non-water dependent use projects. The proposed changes regulation require all projects seeking a license to consider the projected effects of sea level rise, climate change and sea level rise. We can't forget about the overstressed public infrastructure in the interior parts of the state. What this does, as you can see from that second bullet, it adds water dependent use projects and simplified licenses and renewals to the mix. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. The second thing that we do is we've come up with a way, we think, to encourage owners of mixed use development projects, non-water dependent use projects, doesn't have to be mixed use, to move utilities, switchgear, et cetera, from vulnerable locations, be that on the first floor in a floodplain or in the basement. Certainly some of these are located in basement areas that could very well flood. I think we all know that. So the department has sought ways to encourage moving mechanicals from those spaces to the rooftop where they're safer. Presently, one could do that without an approval from the department if it were unenclosed mechanicals, air conditioning units, air handlers, what have you. In some municipalities, if you move those items to the rooftop, and have to put them in an enclosure, utility penthouse, mechanical penthouse, something like that, you may run into an unintended consequence of having the top floor being the top level occupied by greater than a certain percentage, which would trigger an increased building height under zoning, and sometimes, therefore, an increased building height under Chapter 91. The change that we're proposing will eliminate the potential to require a Chapter 91 license amendment if you're just moving mechanicals to the roof. You move it to the roof, you put it in an enclosure, perhaps the municipality may think it's an increased height. The department will not consider it that. The department will not require an amendment to merely move utilities to the roof, enclosed or not. The third item here is one of my favorites. That has to do with non-tidal rivers and streams. The Commonwealth is expending considerable effort, has done considerable studies, and is working hard to replace many undersized culverts in the Commonwealth. You can't, a week doesn't go by when we don't hear about a municipality receiving a grant in order to do this, to abate this substantial inland flooding risk. It is the program's intention, by a small change here, to clarify that the replacement of existing culverts in non-tidal rivers and streams, so many of those are exempt, as you may know, because the culverts are too small to be navigable. So if the culvert is too small to be navigable, the culvert itself and that footprint is not subject to does not require a Chapter 9 license. However, you have to construct this in the real world, these culvert replacements. And if you will excuse the reference, this isn't Star Trek. You can't beam that culvert out and beam the next one in. You have to build it. And the consequence of that sometimes is that there is dredging and there's placement of fill within that jurisdictional water body, and therefore licenses are required or a permit is required. It is the department's intention through this change to provide some clarity that the replacement of that exempt culvert must include a little bit of work upstream and downstream, and will not trigger a license or a permit. And it's not as simple as that. There are some caveats, but that's essentially what we're seeking to do. To clarify, we're not creating a new exemption, we're clarifying an existing one. I've been a part of many heated conversations about what constitutes bank stabilization, what constitutes the project. And what that has told us is that we need to be clear in our regulations as to what is exempt and what is not. And that is what we seek to do. We have also taken this opportunity to update some of the definitions in the Waterways regulations. You can see here what we've added and what we subtracted. There are two reasons to make these changes. One is that we wish to keep the Waterways regulations consistent with regard to terminology where we are able, with the wetlands regulations changes that have been proposed. The definition of coastal high hazard is a little bit broad. It is certainly more broad than A zone and AE zone. Excuse me, than velocity zone. So we seek to clarify that by being consistent with the proposed wetlands regulations and more consistent with the FEMA regulations. You will see, I can see the hands going up now asking, Daniel, you're going to start regulating primary frontal dune. And the answer is no, we're not going to start regulating primary frontal zone under Chapter 91. That definition happens to appear in the velocity zone definition. And rather than have a definition that includes an undefined term under regulations, we don't want to add any more of those. We've added that additional definition. Okay. With regard to what projects must consider sea level rise when they apply, it's a simple answer. All projects in the proposed regulations, all projects must consider projected sea level rise. I list 3 sections here. Each of these sections has a small change in the language of the regulation to incorporate this requirement. When I say must consider, it doesn't necessarily mean that all structures proposed in a license must be raised above the 2070 projected elevation. For instance, many simplified licenses, most simplified licenses, are merely for a small residential dock. What's the purpose? You don't want to raise a small residential dock above the 2070 elevation. That would kind of defeat the purpose. So when considering projected sea level rise, the department will, and we ask the applicants to consider the life of the structure and how that structure will react to sea level rise. You could think of examples on tidal rivers. Perhaps they need the ability to add to the top of a pile so that it will float higher and won't come off and become a hazard to navigation. So there are many examples where the regulations require applicants to first consider resilient mass clearinghouse for the most current mapping, shoreline change, sea level rise, et cetera. We have reserved for ourselves and for all of you in the regulations the flexibility that other credible, more recent information may also be considered as part of considering projected sea level rise for a project. If we were to define a number, an elevation, as soon as we publish that, it would change, guaranteed. So we selected resilient mass as the location to be able to go and find the best information, the most recent information. And if it's not there, if somebody else has published something else that may be of credible discussion point, then that's also on the table. So we've kept a little bit of flexibility there, but we want folks to go to resilient mass as the first step. The change to 915 here for extended terms. Presently, any application for an extended term license, there are several criteria that the department shall consider when determining if the appropriate length for an extended term license. The very last part of that regulation says, and other relevant factors. Now that I'm in the public sector here for 5 years, that is my favorite part of the regulations. Other relevant factors. The department has and will continue to consider sea level rise and climate change as a other relevant factor. This change makes it formal. This change so that everybody can see that projected sea level rise is a consideration that's required for extended term licenses. It's not just a practice, it will be regulation when these are promulgated. There we go. Engineering construction standards, we made a small change here. And again, it's essentially the same change. That project subject 937 must consider historic sea level rise. The top item here, conservation capacity of water dependent use, that is at 951. That's where we affected the change regarding height limitations, whether we would consider utility enclosures on the roof for height. And that's the location where we've made that small change to eliminate that from consideration of height for utilities on the roof. We want to acknowledge that not all municipalities treat building height the same. what is an occupied floor? That it varies from municipality to municipality sometimes. We're offering this change. Perhaps the cities will lead. And then the last item is the culvert, clarifying of the existing exemption for certain projects in non-tidal rivers and streams. Again, particularly culverts, we are seeking to culvert replacement projects we're seeking to address. So, this is the schedule going forward. This is the second of the 2 public information sessions on January 17th. We have 2 public hearings next week. Comments are due on March 1st. And the comments should be sent, that's on the next slide. Comments should be sent to the Waterways programmatic email address, dep.waterways@mass.gov. It's critically important that you put Waterways resilience comments in the subject line. The programmatic email receives many, many emails every day. And it's important that you all spend the time and effort to put comments together. We want to hear them. We want to read them. We don't want to, I don't want them to get misplaced in any way. So please put that subject line. Of course, I'm happy to accept your letters and postcards at the 100 Cambridge Street office as well. It's our strong preference for electronic comments. So that is the 12th of my 12 slides. We'd be happy to take questions. Stephanie?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Just a quick note before we turn to questions for those who joined after we started. I just want to reiterate a couple of things. One is this question and answer in this information session is a wonderful opportunity for us to sort of preview for folks who plan to officially comment on these proposed regs. But your input here tonight does not substitute for you or your agency or organization actually submitting formal public comments. So please remember to do that. The second thing is, we do, you're not confused, you're not seeing double. We do have 2 related regulation packages out for public, draft regulation packages out for public comment at the same exact time period. So tonight's session is about the Waterways Chapter 91 proposed regulations. There are information sessions and public hearings about the proposed changes to the wetlands regulations. Information sessions happening tomorrow and next week. I put the link in the chat for the schedule of information sessions and public hearings. And then finally, as we get ready to start taking folks with hands up, when I call on you, can you remember to please state your affiliation? And we will start with Shang Wang.
Good evening. Thank you for the great presentation. So I'm affiliated with the Creative Land and the Water Engineering located in Southborough, Massachusetts. It's a consulting environmental consulting company. So I have a couple of things. Actually, it's more probably like clarifying some of the things for the project beyond the current maximum flooding. I think it's the flowage and the V zone, but it will be in the 2070 line. It will be in the jurisdiction, or what is it? We need to design so in a way the jurisdiction is expanded to the maxima as of the 2070 prediction, and that one will subject to change, or is if I understand, because it's just a prediction, it's not real, right? It's just a prediction or project. That's one, and the one is regarding the jurisdiction and the engineering design. So I'm trying to comprehend. I kind of know, but I because I was reading the regulation clarifying the high hazard to the V zone. So we do have like a general area subject to coastal flowage, storm flowage, which is up to the 100-year storm condition. And the separately, that should include the V zone, I assume. Or, I mean, what's the real difference between the area subject to this coastal flowage and then the V zones? That's the second question. And then
Can
third
we
is
start with those two, Deshang?
okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me make a very, very broad introductory statement, and then Daniel and Pam and I can flesh that out. So, Deshang, you are a perfect example of somebody who is thinking both about your Chapter 91 regs, if you're helping design a project, and the Wetlands Protection Act. So just to be clear, the proposed Chapter 91 regulation changes, they're not proposing to change the jurisdiction of Chapter 91 for tidelands or non-tidal rivers at all. It's simply a matter of, in jurisdictional areas, applicants needing to consider sea level rise. So that, and we can dig into that more as needed, but I just want to make sure that we don't leave anybody with a misunderstanding that we're trying to adjust the jurisdiction of Chapter 91. And then on the LSCSF, or land subject to coastal storm flowage side, those proposed regulations are in the wetlands regulations, and essentially what we're doing in the wetlands regulations is introducing performance standards for that LSCSF or coastal floodplain area. Believe it or not, up until now, there have not been performance standards for that wetland resource area. So that's what those proposed regs do. So I just, and we're not, so neither of the two proposed reg packages are contemplating changing either Chapter 91 or Wetlands Protection Act jurisdiction, merely the performance standards that would be used within those jurisdictional areas. So that's a really basic, I just want to make sure we differentiate those two things at the outset. And then Pam or Daniel, if you care to dig in any further on that.
Well, I can just quickly explain that land subject to storm flowage is, as Stephanie said, is an area that is the term from the Wetlands Protection Act, and it goes out to the 1% annual chance line or storm of record. The farthest flooding has gone. So, and again, these terms are added to in Chapter 91 because they're used in the Chapter 91 regulations. But anyway, you have a very large area that's subject to flooding, and that is divided into zones. And the zone that is closest on the seaward zone is the velocity zone, and their waves are base flood elevation and waves of 3 feet. So more than 3 feet. So it's where the wave action is strongest. The next one, zone landward, is called the moderate wave action area, and that's between 1.5 to 3 feet. And then further landward, and that is a defined term now in the Chapter 91 regulations. And then there's a third area that's the more landward of the 3 zones within that in extensive area and flood extensive in many places area called the minimum wave action zone, and their waves are less than 3 feet, going down to a bit of a flat water but still flooded. And I can pick up another question while we're here. There was somebody asked, I think it was Adrian asked about why there was no definition of the minimum wave action zone, and that's simply because it wasn't used in the Chapter 91 regulations. But again, the intent here was to try to get consistency for these terms between the wetlands regulations and Chapter 91 regulations.
Thank you. If I may just do a quick follow-up, it's about this performance. So in the wetlands protection section, the OSCS, it doesn't really need to provide a compensatory storage if you order in it, not like the land subject to flooding for the non-tidal rivers. So any of change of this resilience will alter that kind of thing, or there's some new performance required, or just basically engineering safety concerns.
Yeah, I actually would urge you to attend the info session on the wetlands regulations
Yeah, I will go
tomorrow, because the bordering land subject to flooding, which is a bit of an aside, but anyway, just briefly, that's another resource area in the Wetlands Protection Act for inland rivers, and that does rely on largely, well, not largely, but that's why a strong component of it is relying on compensatory storage. We do not have use compensatory storage for in the coastal area because it just doesn't, it just doesn't work. The Atlantic Ocean is very large and the floodplain is very large. So compensatory storage is, is not really a factor there in the performance standards. We have other performance standards, and we do care about flow and velocity and volume and redirection and channelization, many things, but we do not focus on compensatory storage. Daniel, I'll turn it back over to you. Or next question.
Thank you very much, Pam.
Sure,
I think
sure.
there was one further question, and that had to do with expansion of or landward migration of Chapter 91 jurisdiction as sea level rises. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
That's what I thought.
Okay, yes, Daniel, why don't you take that?
Thank you. Mean high water is the landward boundary of flowed tidelands. Of course, in certain situations, many situations, there are filled tidelands landward of that. So the limit of Chapter 91 jurisdiction is the most landward of historic high water or mean high water. Mean high water will migrate as mean high water migrates up the landward boundary of mean high water, and therefore the landward boundary of flow tidelands will migrate further landward. This set of these set of draft regs does not address that. That is certainly a complex and very important question. We don't address that in 1.0. It is near the top of our list for Resiliency 2.0. And I in no way am deflecting the question. We've been talking about it a lot, but we have not yet proposed how to address that.
In the regulation, they say for engineering design, need to consider that projection of the sea level rise. So what's that mean? It's not jurisdiction, or it's just it's jurisdiction. So if I doing a project in the projection zone, do I need to go to apply under the Chapter 91 or still goes to, is any permit, or just considering it from engineering perspective?
So
how that procedure goes?
If you have a project that's in a floodplain, you are required to seek to file a notice of intent and seek an order of conditions under the Wetlands Protection Act, and the floodplain considerations are addressed in a robust manner in the Wetlands Protection Act regulations. As I said earlier, the Chapter 91 jurisdictional boundary is based on mean high water, and then historic high water. And if you've got a non-water dependent use project that's in filled tidelands, you must consider how will the project address sea level rise during the life of the structure. If you're building a large mixed-use building that will last 50, 100 years, then the department will ask, how are you addressing the predicted sea level rise? And we will further ask the question, what type of flexibility are you maintaining in the project so that if it gets worse, is there flexibility to be able to address that? And so these are non-water dependent use projects that are on the water, piers, docks, etc. Those will be considered a little bit differently, but you must consider sea level rise for that. If
I have a building located outside of
Shane,
covered.
pardon me one
Stephanie?
second. I just want to underscore if I understood you correctly, I just want to make sure. We are not changing the Chapter 91 jurisdiction based on projected sea level rise. So if something is in jurisdiction, and it requires a license, then it must consider sea level rise. If there's some place landward that some sea level rise projection said in 20 years it might be jurisdictional, we're not there yet. So right, okay, so I just want to make that very clear distinction. We're not doing projected jurisdiction. The jurisdiction is the same until such time as there are new, determinations of mean high water. And so I don't want to cut you short. We have several other folks that may want to ask questions, and I do encourage you to come also to the wetlands protection public information hearings, where unfortunately we have way more than 12 slides to regale you with details about our proposed reg changes. So thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I there's a little bit confusion there because I think I don't remember in the regulation, it did say that you have to consider. Then my question is, yeah, I understand I have to consider, like say, for building design and the procedure wise, do I have to go through the Chapter 91 procedure or just in my other permitting process? That's because if I remember right, it says you have to consider even beyond the current flood zone, if it in the coast that this based on the sea level rise, that definitely going to expand and right.
If your project is, when you submit your application, if the project includes work that is within Chapter 91 jurisdiction, then you have to get a license or a permit, and you must consider sea level rise. And I will give a brief example of a residential development we permitted maybe a year ago, and the building was designed to address the 2070 predicted sea levels. And yet they asked for a 65-year license. We asked that the project team describe for us how has additional flexibility been retained in the project to address sea level rise for the full life of the license. That project team declined to make any modifications or to provide that additional information. And with full knowledge of that, after discussing it, the department issued a license for, I think, 47 or 48 years, the length of time that the project was able to address predicted sea level rise. So every project is different, but if it's in jurisdiction, need to deal with it. Doesn't mean your peer. I'm sorry, Stephanie. It doesn't mean that your peer needs to be, the surface needs to be, or the lowest horizontal, it doesn't need to be above the 2070 or above the 2100 elevation. It merely means that there must be factors built into the design to address sea level rise. Perhaps that is the ability to raise it up and not have to put all new piles in. I'm not an engineer. I don't want to limit the potential for how these things might be addressed. We will leave that to the applicants.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Desheng. All right, next up is Jamie Medea.
Hi,
Good evening,
thank you
Jim.
very much. This is incredibly helpful. And I want to start by just saying this is really important, and you've done an amazing job over a long period of time. Thank you. Really important.
Thank you. Next question.
Yeah.
Right ahead, Jamie. I'm sorry.
I'm having trouble understanding a lot of it because even though I practice in the area extensively, there's a lot of the Chapter 91 regulations are quite intricate and many different things marbled in. So I sincerely don't know the answer to a lot of things. My first observation is I really hope you I hope you post FAQs, frequently asked questions, before the public hearing date. I am disappointed the public hearing date is only one date. And then one of you knows that the main reason I'm disappointed is that one date is when the Mass Marine Trades Association had already scheduled its annual education conference. So it's not possible for most of the people in the water dependent use community to be able to testify. So I'm sorry about that date, but it is what it is. I also hope that you schedule another information session after the public hearings, but before March 1st. Because for you, this is all now really understood. You know what you're talking about. For us, we're reeling. What's this? What's the wetlands? How do they tie together? What about division of the water quality certificate? Those are observations. Then my question is not on behalf of anybody in particular. Oh, there are many clients trying to ask me, what does this all mean? If there were a new proposal coming in from after these regulations, they were promulgated as is. If there are a new proposal concerning a property that has existing licensed structures and existing non-licensed structures, are any of them now prohibited from getting a license under the new proposed regulations? And part two, is anybody in your Chapter 91 regulations prohibited flat out, no matter what they propose in any particular zone?
Well, those are some thoughtful questions. Stephanie?
Do you understand? I'm not sure I understand the question.
So frequently on the same site, there can be previously licensed structures and unlicensed structures, or previously licensed uses and unlicensed uses. Is there a difference in how they're going to be treated based on these proposed changes? Is one grandfathered, one not? People project sea level rise as best they can using the appropriate data. They account for it. They do the right thing. Is anybody now not able to get licensed due to the new regulations? Second part, is there any zone that is flat out prohibiting new structures or uses? Because I see in the wetlands regulation changes, there are flat out prohibitions, which I will take up in a different session.
All right. I'm gonna try to go backwards, and you'll excuse me if I ask you to repeat a part of a question.
Yeah.
We're not changing. I'm not sure this is in the right order here. We are not changing the eligibility requirements for licensing. A project that requires a license today will still require a license after we promulgate these regs. What we are trying to do is to require projects to consider sea level rise, projected sea level rise, and find ways to deal with that. Very frequently, I'll use a mixed use development example. When we have a mixed use development on Commonwealth tidelands, this is a good reminder for everybody about those projects. They come with certain public benefits in order to balance the public and private considerations. And those public, since certainly the private benefits go the length of the term of the license, the public benefits must as well. So in this case, the projects must consider, how are you going to deal with sea level rise for the life of the project? Looking back to my residential example, they were only willing to go to 2070. Well, I only authorized them to 2070.
I understand what you said, and I support that personally. That's a personal comment, not a client comment. I think that was a very smart projection to have considered, and a way to link it to the project term. Makes sense.
Okay. Now, certainly you're familiar with the regulations. Certainly there are one could propose a project that's within Chapter 91 jurisdiction that may not be licensed.
Yeah.
That's usually within designated port areas. You can't have non-water dependent uses.
I'm not
over,
asking about that. I'm asking about if there's anything in these changes.
No, we do not create any new sets of exclusions. We're not modifying the categorical restrictions and exclusion sections of the regulations. We're not prohibiting any new activity. We merely want projects to consider sea level rise and address them for the life of the license.
Makes enormous
as
sense.
appropriate.
Totally in favor, personally. And I want to observe most pilings these days are built much higher than they think they're needed for. So they naturally accommodate. And the floats go up and down and the biggest issue is actually putting in stops so they don't bottom out. but that's for wetlands purposes,
Mhm.
not chapter 91. The
Yeah.
other thing I'll observe is you mentioned height in the water dependent use zone, but there is no height restriction.
I'm sorry, I did not mean to intend in the water dependent use zone. That was not my intention.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Building non-water dependent use buildings there are height limitations. Starts at 55 feet. Every 1 foot back goes into 1 foot up. And if one were to have something that was perfectly compliant with that number and then needed to move utilities to the roof, we would not deny that request. We would approve that request because we would not be considering the movement of utilities to the roof in part of our height considerations.
Understood.
No guarantee what a municipality will do, but DEP under 91 will not punish that person.
And are people supposed to get a license approval to do that?
Yes, it is a modification to an existing licensed project. Yes, they need to ask. And
thank you very
that
much.
way
I
we'll
won't
know.
use up too much time. Very, very helpful. And I really support the consideration and taking into account of projected sea level rise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jamie, before we move on to Dr. McGlincy, just two quick things. One is duly noted your request for some additional meetings. Not sure that we can accommodate that, but I do understand the request.
Thank you. It's not for me. It's
No, I understand.
numbers of people, and I know hundreds and hundreds that need to know and don't know. I'm still getting people saying, what? There's reg changes? And
Will you help us help them and make sure that they have all oh, wait a minute, we just did the other. Sorry, there is not another public information session on this, but they're recorded. They are recorded, and to the extent that people have, a spare hour and 15 minutes, it would be helpful.
I can spread that out for sure. An example is simply people send out, say, a monthly, or trade associations send out monthly newsletters. Environmental organizations send out monthly newsletters. This came out December 22nd when we were trying not to even read our emails. And then the information sessions come right upon all the workload that we didn't get done during the previous week. And then the information sessions are followed by a public hearing, which is very soon after that. And we're still trying to figure out what they say. So my suggestion about the FAQs, and I'll then move on, and a dialogue like this after the public hearing, but before public comments are due, will end up as more useful information for DEP. Now I'll be quiet, mercifully, and thank you again, because really this is a wonderful effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
And I will encourage you and everybody, when you do eventually submit your actual formal or official public comments, it's helpful to us if you provide the context of your concern, if that's readily available, because that will help us better understand, what the problem or issue or confusion is that's being posed, and that will help us better be responsive to those comments. So that goes to Jamie and everybody. Okay, moving right along, we have Dot McGlincy.
Hi, folks. Thank you very much. Dot McGlincy, Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissions. I echo what has already been said. First, thank you so much for having these info sessions. Very helpful, but as Jamie said, I want to reiterate what she said in my own words, is that, oh my gosh, we've got 3 sets of regulations and people are just beginning to wake up and just beginning to realize it. So it would be very helpful to consider, for DEP to consider another, at least an info session. You don't have to take comments at that point, but before the March 1st, Cinderella date, we really need to have, I think, additional information out there. You've been publishing it. You've been telling people. I've been telling people every week. We send out weekly updates, but it's so confusing. Oh, well, you have to sign up for this set of regulations for those info sessions. Oh, and then there are the hearing dates. So it's a lot to digest for all of us. And so I think the point was well taken that if you can consider another set of info sessions before the regs come out, people are going to have digested a little bit more and maybe ask a few more questions so that they can put their arms around all of the reg packages. And I think that's really going to be useful. That wasn't the reason for my hand up. You did answer, Stephanie, you did answer one of them, my questions in the comments that after the comment period closes, you're anticipating promulgation of these regulations sometime in the spring or summer of 2024. My question to you is, will MassDEP be summarizing the comments that they receive and response to comments? There are other programs that do this.
Yes.
Or have done this in the past, and I find it very helpful. Maybe it's a similar comment that Jamie had about the Q&As, but I think it's really important that people see some of those questions, and you can say, that's a stupid question. Oh, you wouldn't say that. You would say, that question is not addressed in these regulations. It may be addressed in the future. My final comment, or at least a comment, is to the 37 people in this audience, as opposed to the 139 people that were in this afternoon. Spread the word, make sure everybody knows about this, and make sure everyone asks questions and comments, and the more the merrier. MACC, our association, is having a lunch and learn next week. It's on our website, maccweb.org. We are not going to inform everyone as wonderful things as DEP is. We're going to just try and make everyone aware of the types of regulations and the reg packages that are out there, and stimulate a dialogue the month before when the regs are due, because it's so much material to digest, as it was a lot of material for all the MassDEP people to prepare, write, edit, proof, and get them into the world so we can see them. So I applaud DEP, but I also think all 37 people on this call need to spread the word a little bit more. And please, if DEP can consider writing summaries of the comments that are received and responses to them, that will help us, because as you have said to us in the past, Stephanie and others have said, be thinking of what Resilience 2.0 should look like. This is one piece of the puzzle that we've been waiting for several years for, and we're really happy that it's all coming out. But we've got 2.0. If they're not hitting the nail on the head, I think we all need to suggest for 2.0 package somewhere either in these regulations or in separate documents. I think it's important that we say what else needs to be addressed to deal with the climate resilience. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dot. I want to, so Stephanie addressed previously the question about, are we going to have more sessions? So consider that comment logged, consider that topic will be a topic of discussion. I don't know what the answer is either, but we will certainly discuss it and figure out what the right thing to do is. I want to address the last comment you made just now, and that is, what should be in 2.0? At the end of the session earlier today, you heard me say that these are not small challenges. These are substantial challenges. The difficulty sometimes is we don't know what we don't know, right? And I mean that as a DEP person. I mean that as a human being. I mean that as someone who's trying to deal with climate change. The Waterways program, I very specifically tell you, the Waterways program wants to hear from folks. We want to hear, you ought to change this. What about this problem? What about this? How about that? What's going to happen when sea level rises? Et cetera, et cetera. We want to hear those things. There will be a robust process to seek input from stakeholders, from the public, from anyone else when we get a little bit further along here. But please do not hesitate to send us your report, send us your letter, send us your white page, send us your comments. Please be certain to put the climate resiliency tag in the subject line of your email. This is not a problem that's going to be solved by the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 DEP people that are here tonight. It's going to be solved by those people and lots of other people at DEP and lots of other people in the Commonwealth and people like all of you. Please, we're asking for your help. We'd love to have it.
And to just get to one other point you raised, yes, we do plan to prepare a response to comments for sure, and that will be posted. I can't tell you exactly when that's going to happen, but these topics for this regulation package in Chapter 91 and the same for wetlands and 401, they're too important to not, folks deserve a response. So we will do that. I do not see any other hands raised at the moment, nor do I see anything in the chat that hasn't been addressed. So what I'm going to do is prattle on for another second until until I see a hand raised. Go ahead, Dot.
Thank you. This is more of a comment than, and I know it's not a true comment, but I wanted to say thank you for using a guidance document rather than regulations for a standard to follow. Precipitation is an example. I'm really happy that these regulations are referring to the climate resilient lands
Resilient mass.
for sea level change. And I'm really glad we're not just putting the requirement of 10 feet or 2050 as the date in the regulations. I'm glad we're looking forward to justifying those, in the application, justify what number you used. As you all know, I come from the Massachusetts contingency plan world. I was a licensed site professional for 30 years. I had to justify, oh, this is just a little spill of 8 gallons or 12 gallons to asphalt. It sat there for 5 minutes and I cleaned it up. I did not sample soil. I did not go into groundwater. You're justifying that rationale because you're dealing with a guidance document as opposed to the regulation saying thou shalt do such and such. And I really appreciate that. And I'm hoping that we can add that kind of flexibility in other regulations that we'll talk about tomorrow and next week. So thank you. Just a thought.
Thank you, Dot. And not surprisingly, that did generate a few other hands. So let's go to those. Pete Sampu, you are next.
Cool, yes. Town of Barnstable Conservation Commissioner, PhD in oceanography. What I am aware of, both as our town CONCOM member and if my professional background, is the uncertainty in the guesses of sea level rise over the next 45 to 50 years. How often within your choice of sea level rise estimates will you have the opportunity to revise based on the best available science 10 years from now, or 5 years from now, or 20 years from now? Thank you.
Was the question?
Will you be able to revise your sea level rise estimates based on evolving science? Greenland's melting faster than they thought.
Yes, we will. I'm sorry, I'm not sure who it was. Dot. We did not pick a number. We picked a standard, and that is the best, most reliable information. We're directing folks to Resilient Mass as a clearinghouse to where that information could be found. We're not excluding, because we say and other reliable sources, we are not excluding additional information, additional studies, other studies that may maybe not find their way to Resilient Mass for some reason. But if they are thoughtful, well thought out, well done, appropriate studies, we will consider those as part of our deliberation when licensing. I don't want to set a number. As soon as I set a number, it's going to change.
Right.
So that's our intention.
And who is responsible for bringing that information to Resilient Mass, or to you?
There is a robust, really, this is an incredible focus for this administration. The climate chief and her team are spending considerable effort in bringing this information together. I think there's an abundance of ways to get that there.
Okay,
So-
good. Yeah, I'm pretty psyched with Healy's administration. Thank you very much.
Excellent. I want to interrupt for one more moment. I need to depart. Today is my daughter's 18th birthday, and we have dinner reservations at about 7:15. So I really need to leave. You are in very good hands here with Stephanie
Good
and
luck,
Chrissy
hooray,
and Pam.
congratulations, you got her
Um,
to 18.
So thank you, Jamie. So I'm going to depart now. Thank you very much for attending. Please take my request for comments, request for input, request for suggestions. Please take that seriously. I mean every word of it. The more information I get from all of you, the more suggestions. Don't forget this thing, the less likely we are to leave something off of an incredibly important list. So please, we're all in this together. So I'm going to say goodnight. You've got 3 folks who can take care of your questions from here.
Danielle,
you, Ed.
hopefully when you log out, the meeting doesn't end.
I'm just going to leave it here. You can look at maybe my dog will show up and talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
All right. Desheng had his hand up.
After I hear all the conversations, I kind of feel myself in the back of my mind. I do when I come in, I was concerned about the jurisdictional change and based on a prediction. I mean, maybe it can be helpful in your frequent asked questions to say, well, this change is it was going to change in the jurisdiction framework or not. So it sounds like you are not changing that. And so my career, only in my very early years, I think I worked with my boss to get a Chapter 91 for a pure dog. And then after that, I only focused on the 310 CMR 10, the Wetlands Protection Act work. So after I listened into it, correct me, I'm just trying to maybe will help with other listeners to understand the jurisdiction, because overlaps or not overlap, that's what I'm concerned. I say so I'm assuming the Chapter 91 is for the license for the really water related, like a dog and pier, or maybe some kind of ramp things going to the water for license and that design. And but you still, the same time, if you have to fill, you have to order the coastal wetlands, all that in that process. At the same time, you still have to deal with the Wetlands Protection Act part. So in a way, that kind of framework still remain the same. So you are not taking over some of the jurisdiction from the Wetlands Protection Act, because just I saw the probably just for the definitions and the clarifications of the definition updating, but not related to any jurisdictional shifting or change in the 2 regulations. That's what I'm trying to make sure I understand from your presentation, Daniel's presentation, and the question and the answer process.
That's correct.
That's
The
correct.
jurisdiction is not changing. There still will be overlap between the 2 sets of regulations, the boundaries, the jurisdictional limits, but it is Chapter 91 jurisdiction is what it is. That is not something that's changing here. It's only when you're in jurisdiction and your project is subject to Chapter 91 that you have to contemplate projected sea level rise.
Thank you.
Helpful. That's clearly my kind of cloud. I say, well, most of my work is Wetlands Protection Act. So that's why I just want to make sure I will not overburdened with another added on, Chapter 91. So if I don't have to.
No, it's a good clarification. When we live, eat, and breathe it every day, either as an applicant or a regulator, you forget to make sort of the obvious distinctions. Yeah, jurisdiction not changing.
Thank you.
All right. Adrian Lennon.
has a question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this presentation tonight. It was really helpful. My name is Adrian Lennon. I'm a senior scientist with BSC Group. I'm really surprised to see the MIWA be left out of the definitions, but I'm going to hold my breath and find out more about that later. Maybe it's on the 2.0. But I wondered if you would talk a little bit more about non-tidal stream restoration exemption clarification that you've provided in Chapter 91. And could you give some case examples of how that is going to improve stream restoration projects going forward?
Sure.
Thank you.
I don't know that, well, just to the stream restoration question, I can address that. I will send you back to Pam about your comment, your first comment. But when someone is doing the construction, and there are so many of these culverts or so many of these sites that might already fall under an exemption because it's an existing public service project. So it's presumed to be authorized and they can maintain that, but they need to come in and maybe they're within the same footprint where they're replacing this culvert in and of itself for the structure. But when they're building this, they need to do a little bit of dredging immediately upstream and downstream, and they need to put in scour protection because otherwise, I mean, then that's how these projects are developed and designed in order to have the adequate, so you're not blowing out the end of the streams, et cetera. So these are things that we are seeing in so many projects that come to us where they would otherwise be exempt from licensing, just based on it being a public service project, the scope of the work, except for these small components that are associated with construction. And these are scopes of work that we're looking at where if they're putting in scour protection, it's not something where you're putting boulders or other material that would be above the elevation of the existing grade. So you're not reducing navigability of the waterway. It's essentially just it's a different material and it is fill material. So it's not something that's exempt unless we are more prescriptive in that exemption. Does that help?
It does. And just as a follow-up to that question, if you don't mind, thank you. Have you modeled like a certain ratio of fill for size of footprint that you're willing to tolerate as an exemption, or is it going to be taken more as a case-by-case basis?
We're going to take them case by case. We did talk about, so we don't really look at the volume. We look generally at what is the footprint, and what we talked about kind of similar to, anticipated sea level rise is that if we pick a number, it's going to change. If we say no more than 10 feet upstream and down, someone's going to come in and need 11 feet for that one specific location based on, the engineering design. So that was something that we did not include, but there are criteria within the exemption that help sort of manage, or, they give us some guardrails as to what we would be approving.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time tonight.
Of course.
If I may just follow up with Andrew's a question about the non-tidal part. Say I use in a specific project, not specific, it's just it's almost like specific. So if I have an old bridge or culvert on a river, say even it's qualifying as a perennial river, and we need to replace it for a new development. So if this replacement of culvert or bridge is going to the navigation or the ecological and the wetland performance, like say to increase the clearance and the span. So do we still need to go to DEP to asking for the Chapter 91 exemption, or that will be lumped in through the Wetlands Protection Act application?
It is not lumped in through wetlands. Chapter 91 is its own program. So you would want to come directly to us to coordinate. My recommendation would be when you're developing the project, when you first see that it's something that may be within a jurisdictional waterway, to reach out to us for a pre-application meeting. What's most helpful is if you send along a set of plans, even if they're conceptual, they don't need to be 100% or anything. And then we can meet with you and walk through and say, yes, this is exempt. No, it's not. It's in jurisdiction. We do pre-consultations like that all the time. And
okay, I do have a project, and that we do have it's a 40B project in the process, and I was not even thinking.
We're not going to discuss specific
No, I better.
projects right now, Deshang. It
Who
just
should I contact?
gives folks time, unless there's a specific question related to it that's got to.
Who should I contact for this process?
I'm sorry,
about the Chapter 91 process?
Exemption, yeah, if I have a specific project.
Yeah, so I'll put the email, our programmatic email, into the chat, and that's the best point of contact. We have multiple staff who manage that email account and make sure inquiries are directed to appropriate staff for follow-up.
Thank you. Yeah, I will need it because we already have pretty much
Yep.
definitive design done and in the process, probably ready to file NOI. So sounds like I have to check with the chapter 91 part.
Yep,
Excellent.
that's what we're here for.
Thank you.
Okay, okay. I just wanted to just close out on Adrian's comment about the zones. For the flood zones. You don't really need to focus on those very much. I think people are focused on those because we're making the changes to the wetlands regulations. But as Daniel and Chrissy have said, the Chapter 91 jurisdiction focuses on something else entirely, the mean high water mark. And so the prior definition, the existing definition in the waterways regulations cited to the coastal high hazard area, which wasn't, an appropriate term at this point. So all we did was plug in definitions that are current now in the wetlands regulations and the FEMA now uses. So that's really what's going on there. They're not, references throughout the regulations to those zones at all. And as a matter of fact, the primary frontal dune definition had to be included because that was a term in the velocity zone definition. So anyway, sometimes possibly we get into too high a level of detail, but anyway, that's what's going on there. It doesn't affect, jurisdiction or otherwise things in the Chapter 91 regs.
Thanks for that, Pam. Thank you.
I just want to point out that Kyle Johnson had a little discussion going on in the chat, but if I'm not mistaken, it looks like Chrissy's response to Adrian's question, clarifying certain issues about the culvert replacement exemption, and his questions were about similar kinds of work that are for climate resilience, may have addressed that. So just before we close out, I just wanted to see if Kyle wanted to voice.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I think it was very similar to Adrian's question about the types of activities that might have exemptions and not have additional permitting here. With respect to a lot of advancements in technology, there's folks are doing innovative stuff with downstream controls and things like that to manage water levels ahead of storm events if there's a storm in the forecast. So I'm just curious, activities there that, he had mentioned that it was an existing exemption that was seeking clarifications, but I'm just wondering if that's also open, what types of activities may be open for exemptions as well.
So there are the list of exemptions in that section of the regulations. I saw in the notes you were asking what constitutes a public benefit project. And that's actually defined in our regulations as well. So you could, it's a public service project.
Thank you. Yep.
That's one of the scopes of work or one of the types of projects. But there are a list of about, I think it's, A through J or something like that, a list of projects that are exempt from licensing. And a lot of those are simply maintaining something that was installed and has not been changed since 1984. You're allowed to continue with its use. Once you start changing it, that's where it gets very nuanced, and we have to figure out, is that covered as maintenance, a minor modification, or does it require licensing? So it is very project specific, but this was a situation where these culverts, these dam removal projects, we have seen so many of them that are otherwise exempt from licensing or permitting, except for that construction component. And it's just a necessary piece of doing the work and having it up to, engineering standards. So this was where we were trying to sort of, low-hanging fruit where we could capture a situation that we're seeing a lot of, and without any concerns relative to managing navigability, public access, the Chapter 91 interests as they relate to these types of projects.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
And Kyle, that's a great tee up to remind everybody that, obviously what we're mostly looking for is for people's public comments on or before March 1st on these specific proposed regulations that are on the street. But in the act of doing that, as you are contemplating your comments on these, if you and your organization have further thoughts about provisions that you think would also support further climate resilience in the next regulatory update, which we refer to as 2.0, please feel free to include those in your public comments for our consideration. That would be terrific. But you're not, obviously you're not required to, but any further ideas are welcome. I don't see any further hands. Great. Alice put some reg citations in there. Thank you, Alice. I believe that we are prepared to wrap up.
May I ask one more question? I didn't raise my hand. I put it in the chat, so excuse me, perhaps I didn't do it properly. This is Jamie Medea, and the question was, if the new regulations are promulgated as is, what does DEP anticipate using as criteria for the adequate application of the, quote, consider sea level rise, close quote, standards?
So in our applications, we're looking for the applicant and their, engineer and other professionals to present that to us. We're looking for them to say, here's what my project is. This is how we've considered projected sea level rise, and this is why it's appropriate. So Resilient Mass, that's a starting place. If there is other additional information that's relevant, especially specific to a particular type of project, like Daniel mentioned, that is definitely something that, please provide that as well. But we really are looking to the applicant to provide that, and, not just a conclusory statement. We've considered this and this is okay, because, we're looking for that justification for the analysis, and that's what we'll be reviewing. I don't know if that helps.
It does help very much. It says that there's currently no projected definition of what is adequately consider. So I want to share, as a lawyer, that's going to result in many, 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 many appeals, because opponents to any project will be able to say, oh, they didn't adequately consider. I'm not disrespecting your goal of taking into account whatever applicants can provide. I'm observing the outcome will be many more appeals because there are no definitions of what is adequate. Thank you for listening.
Happy to. And I think a lot of those types of concerns we would hope to sort of flush out during the comment period. So someone who does have concerns about, was this an adequate representation or, adequate consideration, hopefully we would see those in the comments, and it gives the applicant an opportunity to respond to those, to address those if something is more appropriate for us to be looking at. Or it may be a situation where it isn't, but this isn't the only discretionary language that exists in our regulations. So the potential for appeal always exists. I don't want to box us in with a standard, and I this is just me speaking off the cuff, but I don't, because it's similar to picking a standard for what is the projection. We'll be doing reg changes constantly, and it also doesn't allow us to consider what else is out there if we pick something specific. So definitely appreciate the thought on it. Hopefully it's something, like I said, that we could work out during the process, because that's exactly what the process is intended to do.
I agree with you. I don't mean to step on your final observation. I agree with you, and especially on climate change adaptation, the technologies change so rapidly that you can't possibly account for every technology that addresses climate change. What materials are available? How strong are they? What does elevation mean? What is blowout panels? What's their utility? So I agree with you. You need flexibility, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Got a thumbs up from Kyle. Okay.
There's one last question in the chat. from Chase Gerbig.
So it's a terrific question. Are the data on resilient mass presumptively approved for use? Or are we expecting applicants to determine if something else is more applicable for their particular site?
I think the intent here is that, yes, this is, if you're giving us what's on resilient mass, we are presuming that that is the current and most reliable information, unless there is something else that's presented. So whether it's by the applicant, whether it's by someone submitting comments on a project, or whether it's something that we in the department are aware of. So all of those things would be considered, but I think what we're looking for is the applicants to come to us and say, here's, this is why this is appropriate. This is why it is most accurate, and, provide us with that justification.
If I can clarify maybe for a second, sorry, Chase Gerbig, Littleton Conservation Commission. If I can clarify my question a little bit, the nature of it really has more to do with appeals and challenges to the licenses. That is, if the information in resilient mass is what's used for the basis for the decision, does that provide a shield from challenges from people potentially opposed to a project that incorrect information, inapplicable information, not the best information, was used for the decision making? And if that's not clarified in the regulations, my recommendation would be that we may want to clarify that that is presumptively acceptable and not meaningful grounds for the appeal of a decision.
So not being an attorney, but having a lot of experience with appeals, what I will say is there isn't a way to shield ourselves from an appeal. That if someone has standing, they can file the appeal. Now, whether it has merit and how far it goes, I completely appreciate your comment, but I just wanted to make sure that this wouldn't be something that, like, there's no world in which we create something in our regulations that says, if it's this, you don't get to appeal.
Sure, and I guess what I meant there is, let's say, make it easier to dismiss the appeal in the event that the information from resilient mass was utilized as the basis for the decision.
I think if we were to get to that place, let me go back a second. I don't know that that's something that we could build into the regulations. Without having thought about it at all, my gut reaction is we, the department, would need to have, we would be presenting our defense for why, or, our position on why we made the right decision. So whether that's resilient mass and someone is arguing that something's more reliable, that I think then falls to us. And I understand that it also falls to, it affects the project. But just my short answer, again, without having thought it through, I don't think there's a situation where we could build something in that says, if you do this, this is presumed to be the most reliable with respect to any
site, anywhere,
challenge, anything at all. But it's a good point. It's something that we should think of, because we do want to have people, we want to give them the best assurances that what they're preparing and providing to us is what we will rely on also. So it's definitely a good point. It's not, as much as I've just tried to give an answer, I don't think I should continue to try to answer it.
And I guess what I'm trying to, the comment I'm trying to get across is, I'm not sure it is useful for the Commonwealth applicants or conservation commissions who are potentially looking at these alongside MassDEP to get into a fight about climate models and which one is the right one and which is the right sea level rise. That's not really a productive use of time. If MassDEP can provide some clarification on, or even some loose guidance that could be relied upon in the case of appeals, that may be useful in certain cases.
Yeah.
Chase,
Send in a comment. Yeah. Good topic for a comment. We spent a lot of time on this provision, so
excellent topic.
more the merrier.
Won't be the only one submitting it, but please do. And also, I just wanted to underscore something you said at the end, is that there are regulations that are codified. And then there are guidance documents that MassDEP issues from time to time that help applicants understand how said regulations are best met. And so, where we have a little bit more wiggle room. So, so excellent consideration for us to take into account. Appreciate your comment. Pam, did you want to add to that? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. I think it's just, it is, again, this is not a sort of a public comment session. So we need
That's
comments in during the appropriate forum, that's all. So, and the more comments, that we really do appreciate comments. So it doesn't have to be a formal comment. So, I mean, it has to be in the right, within the time frame and in a public comment period. So. And
to Daniel and Stephanie's points earlier, sorry, I was just going to add that, there are so many pieces of this, whether it's the context within which someone's looking at these proposed changes, or if it's just something that we're not considering at all. It really is helpful to have, in your comments, here's the situation I'm picturing. This is why I think this is problematic. Am I reading it right? Or, and I do think the FAQ concept is a good idea. We will definitely talk about that for some of these questions that we do here coming up. But that context really does mean a lot, because we've had a number of questions and some of them we don't understand because we don't understand the way that others are thinking about these. We're all thinking about them the exact same way because we've been working on them together. So it really is important for us to hear those different points of view and be able to consider those as part of your comments.
That's an excellent segue to flashing up that slide on the screen if you have it handy, Chrissy. So just in conclusion for tonight, again, thank you everybody for your staying power. We really appreciate your input during this public information session. We hope to see some or all of you at one or the other of the public hearings next week. And Chrissy is putting up on the screen right now the dates and instructions on where and how to submit your official. We shouldn't call them formal. It's your official public comment. It doesn't have to be formal, but it has to be official and it has to be in by March 1st. The other thing I just want to reiterate is this presentation, as well as the recording of this meeting, plus this afternoon's session, as well as both public hearings, if you're truly gluttons for punishment, those will all be available and posted to our website, as will this presentation separately in a PDF. And those should be, the recordings will be posted as available. The presentation will be posted very soon. And so by all means, please point your colleagues to this material as well, for those who couldn't join us tonight. So we appreciate your time, and we may see you at the public hearing. Thank you very much.